Hello everyone, Pastor Howie here as we continue looking at readings and thoughts from the scriptures. In particular, we've been going through the book of Acts together. We're in chapter 23 and we come to verses 12 through 22 where the NIV describes this passage as the plot to kill Paul. So if you read through the book of Romans, you'll discover that at one point towards the end, Paul says he has every intention of coming to Rome. He's never been to Rome. When he wrote the book of Romans, he had never been to Rome at that point. But his intention was to go there on his way to Spain. He had an intention to travel all the way to Spain, spreading the gospel. As far as we know, there's no evidence that he ever did, although it's possible. But we do know he got to Rome, but he didn't get to Rome the way I think he intended to get to Rome. He got to Rome because he went back to Jerusalem, was the subject of mob violence because people from Syria, from Asia Minor had seen him in the temple, assumed because he was the apostle to the Gentiles that he had brought Gentiles into the temple. Into the temple court would be fine because there was a court for the Gentiles. But needless to say, false accusations rose up, a mob developed. He was arrested, being thought to be the instigator of the mob. And when it was found out by the Roman centurions and the Roman commander of Jerusalem at that time that he was a Roman citizen, things changed. The Romans then had to protect him, and they did. But they did bring him to the Sanhedrin, which is what was the subject of the last video, where he defended himself before the Sanhedrin and wisely recognized that the Pharisees party in the Sanhedrin would probably support him more than the Sadducees. So he claimed to be, and he was, a Pharisee of the Pharisees, and that caused a commotion in the Sanhedrin, so the Roman commander took him out. Not before, or at least soon after, God spoke to Paul and said, "Don't be afraid. I have ordained that you preach the gospel in Rome as well." So that brings us to where we are now, this plot to kill Paul. So the Jews recognized that he was being protected by the Romans. They hatched a plot to get him out again, and they would therefore assault the guards that were guarding Paul and kill him. And so that's what we read about. We read about the hatred for the unbelieving Jews who had rejected Christ and rejected the followers of Christ and rejected Paul, who was at once a persecutor, a lead persecutor of the Christians, but now a disciple of Christ, an apostle, and an apostle in particular to the Gentiles. So after this thing in the Sanhedrin, we're told in verse 12, the next morning some Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. Oaths are dangerous things because, if you don't fulfill the oath, God will bring judgment upon you. That's the Old Testament rule of oaths. And here they made an oath that if they're not successful, they will die of starvation. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petitioned the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here." But when the son of Paul's sister, which makes this young man a nephew, heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "Some Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him," which also means they're waiting in ambush for the Roman soldiers. "They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man with this warning: "Don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me." So this is the plot. In the next video, we'll see how things worked out. Anyway, may we avoid conspiracies other than the conspiracy of grace, and that is to share the gospel, banded together. Not necessarily not eating and drinking, although fasting is good for us from time to time. But let us, if we're going to be involved in any conspiracy at all, it should be the conspiracy of grace, to share the light of the gospel of Christ as Paul did, no matter what the consequences. And that's what I leave with you in this video. May God bless your day.